Well, hello YouTube, it's me Fortmaster, and welcome to a Mystic Slime reaction. So funny thing, I had never heard of Mystic Slime before, but then I saw them in in Seek's, Deltarune and Undertale, YouTuber quiz video, and just now, in fact, Quiet Cat on my Discord server suggested for me to react to one of his newest video, which is Frisk is so much more than a blank slate. Which, I mean, thinking about, I know in comparing Frisk to Kris and Deltarune, I have a hard time trying to remember anything Kris did specifically themselves. Because, obviously you have in Deltarune, you have all of the things, people talking about, oh, Kris, he seems weirder than usual. Because we're now in control, or talk about the history and the fact that Kris rips the heart or the soul out of their chest so they can have a limited amount of time of themselves controlling. In Frisk's case, apart from the one part near the end of the Pastor's Route where where Frisk tells Azrael, their actual name, I can't think of any points in the game where Frisk does anything themselves or even hints that they're doing something themselves. Honestly, the closest I could think of would be the one part in New Home with the mirror where it says, oh, it's after all this, it's still you. So yeah, other than that, it's definitely going to be, it's interesting to see. So yeah, I should probably get this thing started. So yeah, of course, as always, original videos linked in the description if you haven't seen it for some reason. Corner video will lead to my Let's Play of the day. And if you like this video or any other video that I make, I'd very much appreciate it if you gave the video a like and subscribe to my channel, because my main goal for this year is to hopefully hit 5,000 subscribers, and at the current rate I'm going, that's totally doable thanks to every single one of you that thinks my channel is worth subscribing to. Yeah, with all that out of the way, let's get this thing started then, shall we?
Undertale is a funny game because people will come out of it in awe at how well written and fleshed out all the characters are, and then have no clue if the main character even has a personality. Frisk is the main protagonist of Undertale, but it doesn't always feel that way. In works of fiction like this, the main character is typically the most popular and discussed, but with Undertale and Frisk, that is definitely not the case. To the point where I probably don't even need to say who Undertale's actual most popular character is.
God, yeah.
Don't get me wrong, it's not like Frisk is completely ignored. They still aren't that far down in terms of popularity, even if they aren't '1, and they still are the character you play as at the end of the day. It's pretty hard to forget about them entirely.
Obviously I've seen a lot of, fan comics talking about, Sans and other characters, but there are a lot talking about Frisk. There's certainly a lot.
Still though, I find that they're oddly overlooked in a way that no other character in this game is. Discussions around who Frisk really is as a character seem to be pretty rare or go under the radar in favor of analyzing other characters instead. It's gotten to a point where many people believe that their entire character is nothing more than a blank slate, which serves solely as a stand-in for the player. But despite their neutral expression and quiet nature, I can guarantee you that they are so much more than that. To be fair, this assumption isn't completely unfounded though, and I think that Toby actually tries to give you this wrong impression about Frisk at first. At the start and throughout much of the game, you can easily be fooled into thinking that they're just another typical self-insert RPG protagonist.
Well, that is, on so many levels, that's so true, because at the beginning of the game, you're told the intro, it's like, oh, there was a human that fell down into the underground, and you're asked to name the fallen human, and then you see Frisk, who is a fallen human. And with no outside knowledge, you have no idea that that's not even referring to you, that's referring to Chara, the first fallen human. So, there's several layers of, that Toby is laying on here to hide things. So yeah, I mean, given that, I could possibly see, there's a lot of stuff that people generally overlook or just ignore, possibly.
They don't really have much dialogue outside of the options that we choose for them. Their facial expression is always this blank one no matter what, and the name that we choose at the start seems to represent them in battles. But the thing is, just like how Undertale isn't your typical RPG,
oh god, that reminds me of, and I can't wait for them to update it, but there's that fan game, like TS Underswap, where, like, you're playing as, like, Chara instead of Frisk, and there's those several points, like, where you go to choose something, and when you flick over to choose it, like, the text changes, or stuff like that. I have no idea what's going on in that story, and I really want to find out. I can't wait for the next update.
Frisk isn't your typical RPG hero either. This becomes really clear when
you
look at Kara, because Kara is that perfect self-insert RPG protagonist that we're led to believe Frisk is. Their speech at the end of Genocide shows that they're only focused on those classic RPG elements, like EXP, gold, level ups, grinding monsters, and becoming strong. And to really hammer it in, the name that we choose, the one that usually represents the self-insert in RPGs, isn't actually the name of the character we play as. Instead, it's Kara's. There's
literally
definitely more to Kara than just that, but it's clear that they're the one meant to be the analog for a regular RPG protagonist. So if Kara is supposed to be the typical RPG hero, well, then who even is Frisk? Well, simply put, Frisk is Frisk.
Frisk, yeah.
They aren't the player, they aren't a regular silent hero with no personality, they are their own person, just like any of the other characters. The ending of the True Passus route where Frisk, completely on their own, tells their name to Asriel always stuck out to me. This isn't the behavior of a normal self-insert main character. At the end of Pokemon, Red doesn't just go and announce that his name is Red. No, despite whatever canon name there is, the character you play as stays as just that. A character with your name that represents you. But this scene completely subverts that and makes a point to say that Frisk is Frisk, not the name you thought you gave them, and not just whoever you want them to be either.
And again, like, the whole thing that, like, again, I'm gonna hope that Mystic Slime goes more into it, but like that's seemingly the only point in the game where that's true. Like, and even like to this point where like there's a whole discussion about whether the narration whenever you look at something on screen, whether that's Frisk looking at it or Chara talking about it, like there's so much like
While we certainly do influence them, they are their own person with their own hopes, their own values, their own personality, and this moment establishes them as such. And if you need any more proof, look no further than what Flowey says to us after the ending. He asks us not to reset and to let Frisk live their life. He isn't talking to Frisk, he's talking to us, drawing a very clear line in the sand between the player and Frisk. But if Frisk and the player are separate, then who's making the decisions in-game? Who's really calling the shots, us or Frisk? Well, it's kind of a bit of both. Sure, we as the player can choose from different things for Frisk to do, but they'll still choose to go about things in their own way. Take for example choosing to heckle Snowdrake. As the player, we pick the option probably expecting nothing more than a simple boo or a tiny insult to come out of it. But what does Frisk do? Well, they tell them that they'll never be loved by anyone, of course. Suffice to say, Frisk does have their own free will, and even if we choose the things they do, they'll choose how.
Yeah, okay, just thinking about that, yeah, Frisk is savage, just plain and simple right there.
How to do it in ways that we don't dictate or have control over. We also have pretty solid evidence that they won't do things that they don't want to do either. In the Snowy fight, we can also choose the heckle option, but Frisk will flat out not go through with it. There's also other more subtle cases of this, like the Toriel and Asgore fights, where you can choose to try and talk with them, but Frisk can just decide not to based on the circumstances. circumstances. Another interesting case of Frisk's level of control over their own decisions is evidenced by their hatred for soda. Okay, please just trust me, I promise this is going somewhere.
The hatred for soda? What? Sorry, what?
When we're hanging out with Undyne, we get to see that Frisk doesn't like soda based on their unhappy look if we decide to try and drink it, alongside the description of it being a sickly liquid. And when we go to Alphys' fridge with instant noodles and soda, even though the soda is explicitly mentioned, we're only given the choice to take the instant noodles, even though the soda would probably also be a useful healing item. To me, the only explanation for this is that Frisk saw the soda and ruled it out completely as an option, hence why we physically can't take it and never get the choice to. Because of moments like this, my interpretation of the options we're given is that these are all choices Frisk considers and is thinking of doing, and as the player, we point them in one direction or another. Now, admittedly, I realize that the logic in this scenario isn't completely rock solid, considering you still can choose the soda at Undyne's house. Regardless, I still think it's a pretty reasonable conclusion to make, especially with how explicit the mention of soda is in the fridge despite us not being able to take it, paired with the context of Frisk specifically not liking it. And I mean...
Also, I just noticed, or I just thought of, like, how odd is it that Alphys keeps instant ramen in the fridge? I thought the whole point of it was that it was just, you could just have it sitting there. And you only had to add hot water to it to cook. Why is she having it refrigerated?
And after all, the options we're given have to come from someone, right? While we choose from the options available to us, Frisk is also the one giving us those options in the first place, so I like to think of it as kind of a team effort. On this note, I also felt like it was important to quickly debunk a popular rumor that Toby Fox once said that Frisk and many aspects about them are completely up to the player's interpretation or whatever the player wants them to be.
I've literally never heard that before. Where did that come from?
To be completely clear, he has never said this. This
quote
simply just doesn't exist. Which is pretty insane because I remember this rumor back from 2015, and I still see it getting brought up a whole decade later. Unfortunately, there are some people who say this just to get around using their pronouns of they, them. And while Frisk's gender has never been explicitly stated, it doesn't really make sense to refer to them as anything else when they're exclusively referred to with these pronouns in-game. Like I've hopefully made clear by now, Frisk is their own character and not just whoever the player wants them to be.
Yeah.
Alright, so if Frisk is their own person, then who are they? What do we know about them? Well, a lot, actually. Even at the very beginning of the game, we can already tell that they're a very outdoorsy kid who likes to spend their time outside by the fact that Frisk starts out with a bandage and a stick. You certainly don't need a bandage from staying inside all day, and you obviously aren't gonna find any sticks inside either.
I mean, it depends on your house, who knows? I mean, Frisk might live, in a very large house with a greenhouse attached to it.
I mean, come on, who didn't pick up a random stick and pretend it was a sword at least once during their childhood?
I still do that when I go out for walks.
Their playful and whimsical nature is continued to be shown throughout the game too, like how they crinkle through the leaves or do silly things to spare monsters like wiggling their arms at Whimsun and Moldsmall. There's also all of the choices that Frisk gives during the date with Alphys, which are really just great in their own right. It's funny because even the definition of the real-life word frisk means to playfully hop around. While they are adventurous and silly like most kids though, there's also much more to them than just that. One of the most prevalent and consistent aspects of Frisk's character is how they find meaning in a lot of different things, even when there isn't any particular meaning to begin with. This is seen in most of the save points, where they're filled with energy and
okay.
determination, even if it's something quite mundane, like the wind blowing or even the smell of cobwebs. They don't have any inherent meaning to them, but Frisk finds meaning in them and becomes more determined because of it. They even find meaning in and are inspired by literal garbage, which is by definition worthless and meaningless.
Again, that's one of those things I've never thought of, yeah. I mean, we all, like, joke around with, like, determination and stuff like that when it comes to Undertale. But again, like, I guess it might also come from the fact that we're not really sure, like, who the narrator is in Undertale most of the time. The idea that, specifically, like, the save point narrations. And Frisk being able to get determination from literally almost anything. I'd never thought of that before. That really is an interesting thought.
Some of the best examples of this are the recurring save points located next to a mouse hole and some untouched cheese or food on a table nearby. To most people, I think this would be a rather innocuous sight, especially compared to everything else around them. The underground is this vast, grandiose world filled with magic, stunning sights, and impossibly complex architecture. But surprisingly, Frisk doesn't focus on the insane world or situation there. Instead, they opt to focus on these simple little areas and end up ascribing a great deal of meaning to them, framing these areas with the mouse holes as an inspiring circumstance, hoping that the mouse might one day muster up the courage to come out from its home and get the cheese. While it's certainly not the craziest way to think about it, I still think that it's quite a thoughtful and meaningful way to interpret such a simple situation, especially considering how mundane and normal looking it is compared to the rest of the underground.
Again, that's another thing. Again, it's always focusing on the small things, never the big things.
One thing about them which is shrouded in mystery, though, is their home life. They seem to at least have a home to return back to based on their dialogue options with Toriel when trying to leave the ruins, but if that household is a nice and loving one is dubious at best.
Yeah.
Sure, they seem eager enough to get back home when talking to Toriel at the beginning of the game, but later on, they're perfectly fine with being adopted by the Dreamers. Not only at the end of the True Pacifist route do they give us the option to stay with Toriel, but there's another interaction with similar implications that's often overlooked. Before the end of True Pacifist, if you go back to Gerson, then you can get this unique dialogue about how Asgore never ages since he's a boss monster and his child is dead. After hearing this, Frisk on their own will then ask something along the lines of what would happen if Asgore's kid was a human, to which Gerson responds that he'd still age even if Asgore was their father. This interaction is so peculiar to me because while Frisk does have a couple of other implied responses throughout the game that we don't get to see, it's never anything nearly as detailed as what they ask about here. It is very vague, but the fact that Frisk asked about something so specific and how Gerson replies about Asgore being Frisk's father specifically makes this further potential evidence that Frisk wants to be adopted by Asgore, or at the very least, the Dreamers. I understand that by the end of the True Pacifist route, Frisk has made bonds with everyone which will last a lifetime. However, I still highly doubt that if they had a perfectly loving and caring family to go back to, that they'd even consider completely abandoning them without a word to move in with Toriel.
Yeah, I mean, unless there was some really young kid logic going on there, it's like, oh, I don't want to live with mommy and dad anymore. I want to go with the funny monsters. Yeah, because, like, otherwise that points towards home life not being the greatest. Ugh.
The other option we're given isn't even necessarily about going back home, it's just that they have other places to go. Frisk loving the outdoors so much could even tie into this as a way to avoid their issues at home, but I think that steps a bit too far into conjecture for me. Heck, there's even the possibility that they don't really have a traditional home to return to and just live somewhere outside, based on these jokes they make about a kid sleeping in the soil. Whatever the case is, I think the fact that they'd even consider moving in with Toriel at the end of the game heavily suggests some degree of a troubled home life. Now, what we've been talking about up to this point has mainly just applied to what we see during the neutral and pacifist routes, but what about genocide? It's hard to believe that the same kid who appears to be a saint and pacifist can be the same person as the monster we see in the genocide route. However, one thing to consider is that no matter what the route is, Frisk is not a perfect child who can do no wrong. Aside from kinda just being rude with their fleeing dialogue, Frisk can also be extremely mean and even downright malicious to others. Remember that heckling dialogue with Snowdrake I talked about where Frisk tells them they can never be loved by anyone? Yeah, that's in the pacifist route. It doesn't stop there either. Frisk can insult others completely unprovoked like Vulcan, steal Icecap's hat, and reduce them to just
God, that's one of those things. I unintentionally did that and completely forgot that's not the true way of doing it. I can't remember what the true good way of, of beating Icecap is. Ugh.
Straight up just eat a Vegetoid, let Monster Kid fall to their death, and the list goes on of borderline evil things they can do all in the pacifist route. There's also one moment that's possible in neutral routes which I think even rivals how evil Frisk is in genocide. There's a bag of dog food that can be found in Alphys's lab, and normally interacting with it just gives you some flavor text simply describing it as such. However, if you've gone and killed every dog type of enemy in Snowden and then interact with it, the narrator will add that Frisk remembers something funny. Keep in mind, you only have to kill all the dogs to get this to trigger, so this can happen in neutral routes and not just genocide. Sure.
God, okay, I did not know that. And God, Kris, not Kris, Frisk is savage, Jesus!
Killing those specific enemies is partly our choice as the player, but the fact that Frisk not only lacks any type of guilt over it, but goes as far as to find it humorous shows a capacity for evil almost on par with the Geno route. Well, alright, sure, they have the capacity to do some, bad stuff in other routes, to put it lightly, but going from that to genocide still feels like a big jump. I mean, compared to that route, it's like putting the teacups against King Dakar. And honestly, I think that's fair. When it comes to the insane degree that their morals can differ in this route compared to others, it's extremely hard to ascertain, and is gonna be very ambiguous, especially compared to the other points I've talked about thus far. I spent a long time analyzing this route and trying to come up with one definitive conclusion about how and why Frisk acts the way they do, but after a long time thinking about it, I don't think there is any kind of undeniable end-all be-all explanation. At least not one that everyone would be satisfied with. So, instead of trying to give you that singular, flawless explanation, I wanted to offer a couple of the better interpretations of it and let you come to your own conclusions. A more by-the-books and baseline explanation of it is that Frisk gets corrupted in a way by the LV they gain by killing monsters, and loses themselves somewhere in the process.
Okay, I mean, I could see that. I mean, the whole thing was, when Chara talks at the end is like, I am the... Like, oh, LV, attack, defense, all that going up. I'm the feeling of that, of numbers increasing and stuff like that. So, I mean, dopamine is a powerful thing. It could have literally been just powered by addiction. Who knows?
Sans tells us directly that the higher your level of violence is, the easier it is to distance yourself from others and inflict harm on them. This could then lead to Frisk losing their sense of self, as not only do they never say their own name like in Pacifist, but even unlike the neutral routes, the final mirror dialogue goes from "despite everything, it's still you" to "it's me, Kara," possibly implying a complete erasure of who Frisk once was. was. And for what it's worth, I think that this interpretation is pretty grounded and even mostly canon for the most part. Sans explicitly tells us about what LV does to someone, and the mirror implications are pretty solid as well. The shortcomings of this explanation on its own, though, are how much goes unanswered about Frisk, like why they even do it in the first place before the LV distances them from others. What reason could they possibly have to do something so cruel? One possible explanation for this, along with the giant variance in Frisk's morality in this route that I personally find really interesting, is that it's their sense of sentimentality, and that whatever the route is, they do care for the people in the underground a lot in one way or another. In Pacifists, this is pretty obvious, as the whole route is about making bonds with those around you and saving the world through those friendships. In Genocide, though, it's a bit different. It's easy to think that Frisk doesn't care about what they're doing, but I don't think that's necessarily the case. What really might be going on is a kind of perverted and warped sense of sentimentality and wanting to see what happens. Take, for example, exactly how Frisk skips over Papyrus's puzzles. At first, it's easy to watch these scenes and conclude that it's nothing more than Frisk skipping over the puzzles to get through with it as quickly as they can.
I mean, I could definitely see that. I mean, given, the whole thing with Undertale and connecting, with gamer culture, when, you'll eventually, you want to do the good route, but eventually you'll do the evil route because you get curious, and you want to see what happens, and and eventually you deplete, every other option and stuff like that. I mean, I could see that as, a potential reason as well. But then that still includes us in the whole thing, since we're the ones that reload the timeline, so to speak. If you go to the whole pacifist thing, it's the Frisk is happy, leave them alone, and stuff like that, so.
But with the specific way in which they do it, it might actually be the opposite. If they want to get through it as fast as possible, you'd think that they would just immediately skip all the way to the end of every puzzle and maybe even try to rush at Papyrus and attack him early. But that
does kind of, it goes to the number of shorts I've seen talk about, what if Frisk was a speedrunner? It just breaks everything that way.
Isn't what they do. They don't attack him, but instead decide to walk halfway through his puzzles, stop, and wait to see his reaction. It's intentionally belittling him and his puzzles as much as possible, and comes off as trying to provoke and get a reaction out of him. And I don't think these movements are Kara taking control either. Not only is it extremely early in the route for something like that to happen, in my opinion, but it's also just not in their character. Kara is straight to the point and uncaring, and probably wouldn't even let Papyrus get away after each puzzle. We can see this clearly at the end of the game where their influence is strong. They don't mess around the same way Frisk does.
Outright kills
Kara doesn't let
yeah.
Asgore give his speech or even let him lead you to the barrier. They walk up to him, cut him off, and immediately hit him for 9,999 damage. Dealt with quickly and efficiently. By the end of the Genocide route, Kara doesn't care about the monsters as people or anything else beyond EXP, and they certainly don't care about their reactions or how they feel. Frisk, though, is quite the opposite. Not only do they care about the monsters, but they seem to have this sadistic desire and take enjoyment from their suffering just as much as their happiness.
So, in the right circumstances, you could think of Kara being just cold, emotionless efficiency, while Frisk, in, the quote-unquote right circumstances, is more psychopathic, almost? Oh, okay, that's not a thought I'd think.
While Kara finds value in seeing stats go up and maxing them out, Frisk finds it in seeing what will happen next. Again, a lot of that is just an interpretation of those events, but if it
very
is
much
true,
so, yeah.
then it serves as a really interesting mirror to the player and our own motivations as well. Just like Frisk, many of us choose to do the genocide route not because we don't care for these characters, but because of how much we do care for them. It's that exact same sick and twisted sense of sentimentality, but under a different context. For us, we kill monsters because we're invested in these characters and want to see what happens if we do. And because at the end of the day, they're game characters to us. We're detached from them because they aren't real and there's no consequences to doing it. Frisk, on the other hand, exists in-universe, but even though the monsters are real people to them, they end up sharing a lot of our same reasons for killing them. They not only kill to see what their reactions will be and what will happen, but with the power to turn back time and cheat death, it's possible that they start seeing the world as just as much of a game as we do.
If that's the case, I wonder, like how do you... I wonder if in universe, if you kind of like ignore the player's influence, could you potentially say that the whole reason why Frisk goes on a genocide route is potentially just like because they're stuck in a Groundhog Day situation? Oh, that's a sick and twisted way of looking at that. Oh, okay.
Although our circumstances are a little different, our motivations align and we both have the same end goal. Push the monsters and this game as far as we can and find out what happens. Our interactions with Sans in the final corridor highlight this especially well. Take this series of dialogue for example, where Sans reacts to us killing a single monster just to see what he'd say about it. Notice that he doesn't just infer this based on the player's actions alone though. He also explicitly mentions Frisk themselves having a certain look in their eye, indicating that they have just as much of a desire to see what happens as we do. Sans' final lines in his genocide fight sum it up best. Both us and Frisk do these things in the genocide route because we can do them, and if we can do them, then we have to. Not out of any desire for good or evil, but simply because we can, and we both want to see what comes next. I mentioned earlier that the definition of the word frisk was just to playfully hop around. And while that is true, it has another definition: to search. With all...
God, yeah, to frisk. Oh god. So frisk is just where Akara was the embodiment of like dopamine from like leveling up and getting video game stuff like that. Frisk is just the search, the thrill of the hunt, so to speak. Ugh.
All this having been said, I want to make it clear that I do think there is still ultimately a bit of ambiguity when it comes to Frisk's character. A large part of that for me is how we never get to see their exact reactions to a lot of important moments because they simply don't have any dialogue or any indication of how they feel after it. Like when they kill Undyne in Genocide, how do they feel about that? Do they respect Undyne as a fierce warrior who was able to give them a challenge? Or do they just see her as nothing more than another obstacle to overcome? Do they feel guilt seeing the parallels between her and themselves, realizing that Undyne is the hero they could have been? Do they even think about any of these things in the first place? With every other Undertale character, we're able to see their reactions to moments like these since we get direct and explicit dialogue from them. But even though we might be able to assume one thing or another about how Frisk reacts to certain situations, we ultimately can never know for certain because of their unique role as the protagonist and the natural lack of dialogue that comes with it. I know I said earlier that Frisk isn't supposed to be that vague blank slate of a typical RPG hero, and I still stand by that. However, I think that Undertale still needs to follow that stereotype in some moments like these in order to successfully trick the player into thinking they do fall into that stereotype in the first place and subvert that trope at all. It would be be way too obvious that Frisk is their own person from the get-go if we did get to see exactly what they thought at the end of every major encounter. So I think that this level of ambiguity is a necessary evil for that subversion of expectations to work at all. If there's one thing that is undeniable about Frisk though, it's their insane amount of strength. Because beyond a reasonable doubt, this kid is so absurdly strong to an almost unbelievable degree.
That just goes... what? Like, even in the pacifist route, like, they fight against King Asgore, who's been touted several times as being, the strongest monster on the ground, even if, realistically, he's probably not putting his all into the fight. And then, there's fighting Omega Flowey and Azrael, and just have Undyne. Like, the fact that even in a pacifist route, Frisk does all of that just points towards their capabilities in such a big way.
We're talking about someone who can straight up just refuse death and face tank a laser beam from a god with their sheer willpower alone. Easily one of the coolest...
Again, still after all these years, I love the fact that it's just a decimal place that just keeps getting smaller and smaller. Oh, such a lovely trait.
Moments in this whole game for me is when Flowey has all 6 souls, outmatches Frisk on every metric, and Frisk takes a step toward him ready to throw down anyways. I don't care who you are, that is aura. That is pure goat status right there.
Oh god,
what makes it all the more insane is that Frisk is literally just a kid. All the 6 other humans were also kids, but they weren't built like this. Somehow, Frisk was able to do what none of the other 6 could and make it through the whole underground. And it's all thanks to that signature trait, their unstoppable willpower, their determination.
Yeah.
What I specifically love about Frisk the most though isn't just their strength, but how they're strong. They aren't always some beast at LV-19 who can erase the world, but they do always hold that mind-bogglingly immense amount of resolve. No matter the route, no matter what, they stay determined. But I don't like them just because of their willpower either. After all, there are tons of other characters in media like Spider-Man and Invincible that have that same conviction to never give up. What sets Frisk so far above and beyond these other protagonists for me is how we're linked together. Frisk and the player are a team, and just like how making decisions is a team effort between the two, the amount of willpower we both have is as well. Because at the end of the day, their determination is only as unrelenting as ours is. Frisk is our conduit into the world of Undertale. If they decide to give up, we can't continue either. We'd have nobody to experience the world through anymore. And it works similarly the other way around. If we give up and close the game forever, that's it. The implication is that in-universe, Frisk stays dead and that's the end of the story. Our determination and Frisk's are diegetically tied together. It's physically impossible for their determination to exist without ours, and vice versa. It's because of this simple fact that I felt far more connected to Frisk than any other video game protagonist. It's why I think game overs and trying again in this game have always been so impactful to me. Because
God, just think of it, like, the idea, I guess that kind of does, get to the whole thing of, the silent protagonist, even though, Frisk technically isn't truly silent and stuff like that. Because, like, in any RPG where they are, like, if you go to, like, Elder Scrolls and stuff like that, and the earlier Fallouts, excluding Fallout 4, like, they're always thought of as, like, really good RPGs. Not only because of, like, the options and stuff that can happen from quests, but it's always the fact that, like, whenever you, the player, communicates, you're always brought up from the menu of, like, all the things you could say, but you never hear the person saying it. You can always, like, say it or imagine yourself saying it in your voice. And Frisk is very much the same, where, apart from, like, the descriptions, you only ever see, like, the highest of, of zoomed out views of whatever's happening, and you can always fill in the gaps with your own imagination.
Cause I know as hard as I push on to whatever goal it may be, Frisk is just as stubborn as I am. And let me tell you, if there's one thing that we know for absolute certain about this kid, it is that they are indomitable.
I love this music.
Well, if you made it here, then sincerely thank you for listening to me rant about this little creature for this long. This video took a while because I really want to do Frisk's character justice along with the rest of their diehard fans as well. But other than that, I think I'm finally out of things to say, so I hope at the very least you found some of this interesting and, oh yeah, maybe subscribe or something, I don't know.
Honestly, again, it's like, so many things just sort of zoom right over my head. The idea that Frisk, even though they're a silent protagonist that doesn't speak or really emote in the slightest, they have so much, for lack of a better word, character. Like, I remember when I was playing Undertale Red and Yellow, I loved the banter between, you know, Clover and Chara, and especially when they talk to Frisk and ask them questions like, why aren't you running? It's like, oh, maybe because they don't want to. They want to get caught or something like that. And very much stuff like that, very much, like, now that I'm realizing, almost fits really well into the actual characterization that Frisk does actually get in the game. Like, the kind of person that does things just to see what will happen, that gets inspired by the littlest things. It honestly is fantastic. I love every minute of this. Honestly, that was a great video. I'm upset that I've never seen any of Mystic. I'm upset that I've never seen any of Mystic Slime's videos before. God. So yeah. I have no idea whether this video is going to be released before or after Deltarune itself is released. So we're going to have to see. But yeah, if there are any other like videos that Mystic Slime has made that you think would be good reaction material, feel free to suggest it in the video comments or go onto my Discord server. I have a channel specifically dedicated for it. Yeah, but that's definitely going to be it for now. So yeah, I hope you guys liked. If you did, leave a like, subscribe if you have not, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.